approve that. That way, if anybody misses, they can check this out, just the intro. So thank you for the reminder,
Hi,
Dottie.
folks. I'm just very grateful to Humanities. Humanities Montana is paying for this and for the support for their program. They're only paying for virtual presentations. So that's one of the reasons we do this just now during the pandemic. And thanks to Kelly, I just have loved knowing Kelly, so I'm very grateful. So I am a descendant of Norwegian and Swedish immigrants, but my education and practice since 1990 has focused on the rights of all people to tell their own stories, particularly the descendants of Indigenous peoples. So I wrote the grant and received the fellowship, Krista McCullough Fellowship in 92, 93 to write a curriculum for using Native literature in Montana schools. And this is the book that was published. So I'm pretty sure you have this in your library, don't you? Kelly? My battery is running low. It mustn't be plugged in. Hang on.
And while you're doing that, I can, sorry,
Okay,
I need, we have both Roots and Branches and Birthright in the library.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So having lived in rural Montana since 1970, my husband and I now live in East St. Paul on Dakota land, 16 miles east and north of the confluence of the Minnesota or Minnesota-Macochi and Mississippi rivers, and within minutes of the cities or Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the Bloomington Avenue setting in the Night Watchman. So a great portion of the setting of this novel is in my neighborhood, actually. Our home is 18 miles east of Louise Erdrich's Birch Bark bookstore, where I have shopped for years. Sidey Erdrich, Louise's sister, talks about her own writing and art and gives us a tour of the bookstore. So I'm going to click on Sidey Erdrich's. So this was from a video that they did of her. And I think it's going to start where I want it to.
Grammarly helps make your writing clear and concise, no matter where you are. Compose a cover letter that stands out, thanks to flawless writing and compelling word choice.
Hang on.
Inspire your team with a presentation free of errors in spelling, punctuation, and grammar.
Ads. And then I have to go to 4. Go to 409. Sorry about this. We had it.
I don't remember not wanting to write. Probably around the time I started reading books.
So this is Louise's
I wanted to start
sister.
Writing books. Grew up in North Dakota in a small town, Wahpeton, which is on the border of Minnesota. I have 6 siblings and a large extended family. My parents were both teachers. You know, I think most people fight their parents on their career paths if they're artists or writers especially, but my sister Louise's career took off, and so my parents didn't object. They're like, yeah, maybe.
And this is the setting of the books, of the bookstore.
This is Birch Bark Books, my sister's bookstore. It's a big part of my life. I come here at least once a week. Love the artists and the writers that are represented here. Can you imagine having, Louise Erdrich curate your book selection for you? It's like the best neighborhood bookstore you could possibly hope for, so I really love it. These are the books from Wigwam Press. They're Ojibwe language books that I direct, so I work with the illustrator, the team that produces the writing. They're the only monolingual Ojibwe illustrated books, and they're used by language immersion programs. I have my own poetry world here. Look at this. This one's me, this one's me, here I am again. This was my first book, Fishing for Myth. And then my second book, National Monuments. This book sold the most of all my books, but I still never got a royalty check over $100. And Cell Traffic is new and selected poems on maternal fetal stem cell traffic, about how cells go back and forth between us and our mother and other generations, our siblings, and how we literally live with one another within one another's bodies. And I thought it was an interesting metaphor to explore. This is Franklin Avenue. It's home to the largest urban American Indian population in the country. It's our little town. I guess, you know, in some places there'd be like a Little Italy. This is the urban res. In 2007, I began curating shows at All My Relations Gallery. It features Native artists almost exclusively.
Okay. So I think I'm still on present. So if you attended my discussion, I don't suppose anybody did, of the Roundhouse a couple of years ago, you might be familiar with some of these introductory videos or images that I'm going to do. But the bookstore is located north of Lake Baday, Makaska, Dakota, for White Bank Lake, in recognition of the people who first called this place home. The largest lake in Minneapolis. Every early surveyors had named it after the ardent racist John C. Calhoun. So everybody always called it Calhoun Lake. There are streets, Calhoun. Well, then somebody began to pay attention and realized what a racist he was. So there was a big movement to change the name. At Erdrich's bookstore, my grandchildren have pet the grizzled and shaggy black dog who sleeps in the center of the store, and they've imagined their own worlds in a playhouse at the back of the store. In 2014, I met Louise in person when I came to the bookstore looking for new Native authored picture books. And if anybody knows anything about my traveling around the state with lots of books in my car and displaying them for people to see, I've been to Miles City a few times. Anyway, this is the place, this Birch Bark bookstore, where I got a lot of those books. So I introduced Louise to my 7-year-old granddaughter, and we talked about the Roundhouse that I just finished reading for the first time. Louise said to us, "I loved finding my way into the mind of a 13-year-old boy." But now I'm going to let Henry Louis Gates Jr. Introduce Louise.
The biggest mistake women can make when it comes to reducing wrinkles is not understanding where they come from. I recently turned 65.
American culture often focuses so much, unfortunately, on the present. Many people don't even know their family history beyond perhaps their grandparents say. Is it common within the Native American community to have a strong sense of where or from whom you emerged?
Absolutely. This is something I think that most Native people have from the very beginning, a sense of where their grandparents came from, where they, who they descended from. It's not only the oral tradition that it makes this so important to people. That's the first thing. But it also is the United States government.
How so?
Because we have to have a very detailed description of our background in order to be enrolled in our own tribe. It's a very different sort of situation for minority peoples. We have to know exactly where we came from down to the last degree.
I didn't know that.
Yes, it's as though each of us has a sort of inner pie chart.
So the American government not only encourages Native Americans to practice genealogy, but demands that they practice genealogy if they're going to satisfy the requirements of being a Native American.
Well, you could see it that way. You could also see it as a way of, through the generations, diminishing, because people don't always marry within their tribe, diminishing the number of Native Americans. Now, for many, many years, most government policies really had the either express intention or the assumption that Native American people were going to vanish. And in fact, that's why some of the strongest treaties were made between Native tribal nations, sovereign government nations, and the U.S. government. But we didn't vanish. But we still have to have that inner pie chart I'm talking about.
Ferocity about protecting your heritage, your ancestral heritage.
Absolutely. It's a very, very strong component of Native life.
It's
to know
fascinating.
who you are. And my mother made us very proud of who we are.
How do you identify, Louise? Do you think of yourself,
I have to get rid
if
of
I might
that
ask you
up
such a
here.
vulgar question, do you think of yourself first as a Native American or as an American or as a European American since your father's German
Popping
American?
up here.
What's the first box you check?
Mother.
That was good to hear, though. Okay. So, so what I have to do is go back to the presentation. Okay, so Louise Erdrich has written a total of 28 books at last counting, fiction, nonfiction, poetry. Her novel, The Roundhouse, received the 2012 National Book Award, and The Night Watchman actually is a finalist in the Minnesota Book Awards that will be announced April 29th. So she is an enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, Ojibwe, or Anishinaabe, and Métis Indians in North Dakota and Minnesota. She's a passionate political advocate for Indigenous women, those missing and victims of rape or murder. And that comes out in this novel. In 2019, nearly 5,600 Native American women were reported missing, according to the FBI's National Crime Information Center. 2019, 5,600 Native American women missing, reported missing. Louise Erdrich belongs to what's come to be called the Native American Renaissance. So we always talk about the African American Renaissance, and but this is the Indigenous Native American Renaissance of the 60s and 70s, with Pulitzer Prize winner and Scott Momaday, our National Poet Laureate Joy Harjo, James Welch, Leslie Marmon Silko, and many others. So over the years, I've worked closely with poets in Montana, such as those you'll hear today. And at a gathering in Bozeman 6 years ago, Minerva Allen said to me, "Dottie, we are all together again. We are family." And it is because of the faithful support of them and so many others like them that I am here with you today. So I'm just going to click on and then get out of it. But this is the link. And you,
let me give you some advice.
oh, we don't want your advice.
The process of doing your second draft.
Okay.
Welcome to Montana
These
Indian
are
Poets
the
Online
poets
Readings.
and their
I'm Mike Jetty,
videos
Indian
of
Education
their
Specialist
reading
with the
the
Office of
poetry.
Public
That's
Instruction.
in birth.
At the site, you can watch and hear poets reading their poetry. Just click on the poet's name to access either the video or the audio-only option. This online resource
Okay. And then you can click on the PDF of the whole document online, or you can go to the library there and get your hands on your own copy. So this is kind of what it looks like. There are photographs and a great index, and then lesson plans. So I just wanted to make sure you knew those. And Kelly has a copy of the list of all of the URLs that I have used in this whole presentation. It's on a Word document. I don't want it published in this part of this presentation, because these are all hyperlinks. but she will send that to you by email if you want to. So I like to ask these questions at the beginning. What disturbed, interested, confused, or enlightened you as you read the novel? Has anybody finished the novel? No? Nobody? Okay. So then we won't have to worry about it, because as you get started reading, and if you can read before we meet again, then these are the questions that I'd like you to consider thinking about. And it's the DICE program. Okay. So The Night Watchman is a historical novel about family and land, heritage and ancestry, and the rights of each individual to determine his or her own identity. And that's one of the really important thrusts of the whole thing. It's a novel about the search for justice. It's about the influence of Ojibwe or Anishinaabe tradition and story on worldview. How does the story that we hear, that we grow up with, the myth systems we grow up with, how does that affect our worldview? And consequently, that worldview provides an understanding of events and possible means for challenging and surviving even the worst possible tragedies. In this novel, Erdrich straightforwardly deals with the juxtaposition of two languages, the Ojibwe or Chippewa language and the duplicitous language of government. As you read, you will find references to language and the burdens the Ojibwe characters experience when government representatives talk to them rather than with them. So I want to go back one more, the guiding question. How can we enrich our experience with this novel? This is the question that we have as we read the novel and talk. I want you to consider the following 5 topics: the historical and geographical context, major characters, the duplicitous use of language, humor, and identity, with poetry. So we're going to have poems coming in and out of this presentation. And how can those poems give us a deeper understanding? So, so first of all, we're going to look at the historical and geographical context. And at the very beginning of the novel, Erdrich explains how she came to write The Night Watchman. And here she reads from that text. And actually, the whole recording that we have here is of her reading that introduction and the whole first chapter. So if you can look at the recording of this PowerPoint, or if you can get the Word program that goes to this link, you can listen to the audio version of Louise reading the very first chapter, which I think is a great way to begin.
On August 1st, 1953, the United States Congress announced House Concurrent Resolution 108, a bill to abrogate nation-to-nation treaties, which had been made with American Indian nations for as long as the grass grows and the rivers flow. The announcement called for the eventual termination of all tribes and the immediate termination of 5 tribes, including the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. My grandfather, Patrick Gorno, fought against termination as tribal chairman while working as a night watchman. He hardly slept, like my character Thomas Wajashk. This book is fiction, but all the same, I have tried to be faithful to my grandfather's extraordinary life. Any failures are my own. Other than Thomas and the Turtle Mountain jewel-bearing plant, the only other major character who resembles anyone alive or dead is Senator Arthur V. Watkins, relentless pursuer of native dispossession and the man who interrogated my grandfather. Pixie, or excuse me, Patrice, is completely fictional.
And that's really very sweet how she reads that, because Pixie decides not too far into the novel that she doesn't want to go by Pixie anymore. She wants to be called her name, Patrice. So you have Louise making sure that she speaks the correct name of her character in the novel. Okay, so you can look up this Essential Understandings link, because that explains, and there is this new, probably maybe a year old revision with colored pictures. It's really beautifully done. And so it explains the different federal Indian policy period, but there are 7 essential understandings, and one of them has to do with federal Indian policy. That's number 5. So we're going to be paying attention today, and and the next time as we talk about the novel, the treaty making and removal period, the reservation period, allotment and assimilation, tribal reorganization period, termination and relocation period. And the termination and relocation period, of course, is what we are dealing with right now. 2 major storyline form the substance of the Night Watchman, and both are linked in one set of federal Indian policies. Termination is Thomas's story, and he is, his name is Thomas Washosh, and she called him Washosh because Muskrat in the Chippewa tradition remakes the world. And that basically that's what her grandfather did. He remade the world for the Ojibwe people on the Turtle Mountain Reservation, because had he not taken the actions he did, their tribe would have been terminated. That was the goal of the government. And the other story is relocation, Vera and Patrice's story. In short, termination resulted in the abrogation of treaties and the destruction of tribal rights to sovereignty. And relocation sought to remove young Indian people from reservation communities to cities around the country to save money for the federal government and to further disenfranchise Native young people and assimilate them into European American culture. Some reviewers have suggested that this is actually 2 novels into one, but I disagree. They are both rooted in conflict with the federal government and its representatives' efforts to decide for Native people from across the continent who they are and who they should be. In The Night Watchman, each of the lead characters in this novel chooses to powerfully define their own identities for themselves. Identities distinctly tribal and ancestral, yet individual and contemporary. This is sovereignty. In a New York Times book review, Luis Alberto Urrea, Mexican-American poet, novelist, and storyteller, writes, "The Night Watchman is high drama, low comedy, ghost stories, mystical visions, family and tribal lore, wed to a surprising outbreak of enthusiasm for boxing matches." And the truth is, so boxing, they have a boxing match to get enough money to travel to Washington, D.C. to argue their right to not be terminated. And the truth is that, according to Erdrich, that they really did have a boxing match and raise money. It is mixed with political fervor and a terrifying undercurrent of predation and violence against women. Now, I just finished teaching this book to a class of 9th and 10th graders in an alternative high school in Bozeman. I taught 2 days a week, 90 minutes a day. And this is the novel they read. And I told the teacher in the beginning, there is some sexual stuff in this novel. He said they'll be able to handle it all right. So I want to tell you, they did. But in his May 5th, 2020 Los Angeles Review of Books, Thomas Millay addresses the political work in this novel, the real horror that lies behind the government efforts that Thomas must challenge. According to CR 108, Indians will be freed from their marginal status and made full citizens, entitled, this is a direct quote from the review, but it's also from the termination bill itself, entitled to the same privileges and responsibilities as are applicable to other citizens of the United States, so as to grant them all the rights and prerogatives pertaining to American citizenship. But for the figures in Erdrich's novel and the real people they represent, those words meant something far more insidious. What the bill does is effectively declare that Indians are not to be considered Indians anymore. So I want you to look at this map, and if you wanted to unmute yourself, if you had something you wanted to say, I want to know what you notice about this map. Enid, you're muted. Did you want to talk? No? Does anybody else want to talk? What do you notice, folks? Well, Kelly, it's your turn, I guess.
Well, I noticed that, I guess just geographically, you notice that you've got a huge blue area and a very tiny orange Turtle Mountain Reservation area and an even tinier green area. You know, that's the first thing I noticed just right off the top, that just smaller and smaller, just literally a parcel, maybe, you know, just a tiny parcel compared to what the cessations amounts of land compared to the actual reservations themselves.
And now I want you to look at the dates.
Right. So are you saying that this is land that was given back to the state at those different dates? Is that what?
It was taken by the federal government.
Okay.
With promises to the Ojibwe people that they would have medical services, they would have education, they would be able to hunt and take care of themselves. And so in 20 years, this is how their land base was diminished. And the truth is that in that time period, Mr. James J. Hill was building a railroad across the top of this state, just like he did in Montana, and they were shooting and killing all of the buffalo. So by 1884, there went from millions of buffalo to minimal, hardly any. So when I talk to high school kids about, I ask them, where do you hunt? If I'm talking to Montana kids, there's always hunters. So I say, where do you hunt? And they say, in the mountains, out on the prairies. And I said, okay, so what if in 20 years, the only place you can hunt is in your backyard, living in Power, Montana or Sydney, Montana? How much are you going to find? And that's what happened to them. So you had poverty, you had starvation, devastating, but they were under so much pressure to concede this because they were starving. So in conjunction with the killing all the buffalo, then what choice did they have?
So what was the population?
The population, I don't know, it had diminished greatly. But I'm going to go to another
Stats on
slide.
that?
Pardon?
Do you have any stats on
I mean,
that?
the federal government assumed this is too much land for you. You don't need it. And they wanted them to be farmers. So I don't know what you guys know about farming in northern North Dakota, but I know what farming's like in Scobie, and it's not too much different. So some years you might have 3 bushels to the acre. So they allotted the lands, but you can, and I have looked up each one of the treaties that were all, I mean, there was huge pressure from settlers, from the military. This was right after the Civil War. So there were people wanting to move here, and the pressure was huge. These Indian people didn't have the resources to stand up and say, this is our land. So they were reimbursed in terms of trust monies that most of them didn't have access to. And then in the Dawes Act, and I will show you that the next time. I will play a clip for you the next time about the Dawes Act, because then with what was remaining in this little piece of that little green area, the government still said, this is too much. You don't need all of this. And so we will allot 160 acres to you, and your brother will have 160 acres over here. The purpose was to separate the families, separate the support systems, so that they didn't have any strength anymore as a tribal people. And so here you had some people living on land that had no access to water. And so they were starving, and they would sell their land then to white people who would come in and buy it. My father-in-law did that up in Scobie area. His father purchased Indian land that Indian people had relinquished that had been allotted to them because they couldn't survive out there by themselves, and they were separated from family. It was part of the whole push to break up the tribes. So I'm going to, one of the people in the last class I taught in Bozeman asked the question of what was the area of land, and I'm trying to find it here. What was the area of land that was occupied? Why am I not coming to the map? That isn't the one I was looking at. So I might have to go to a different one. But this is the history, the one I'm looking at right now, but I think I'm going to go back. Approximate extent of pre-cession lands. So here you can see the Ojibwe people, Algonquin, but here are the Great Lakes right here. So this is all Ojibwe people had lived. They were relatives of the Iroquois and the Algonquin, and their language is similar. But this is a portion of the lands, but it isn't the map that I wanted to look for. So I will have to, I'll have to go back and find that again, but, and make sure I come up with the same one, because a woman in the last class, I've only taught the first portion of the class to this group in Bozeman, and she had asked that question. So now I can see that what I have is not going to work. So does anybody have another question before we go on? No? Okay.
Just to clarify
Okay.
one thing is one is I will be sending out the PowerPoint for those that want to have that. And then also if you have a question, you can put that in chat. I'm monitoring chat. So if that's easier, I'll also do that as well. So go ahead, Dottie.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to this right now because what I'd like you to do, Kelly, is read from page 68. And this is the story of Bebone, who's Thomas Washosh's father. He's an old man, and it tells how he lived in the early treaty years.
Okay, so if people want to follow along, this is on page 68 in the book. It starts out as a boy, and just to let you know, I am no Louise Erdrich. So, Erdrich. As a boy, Bebone had traveled along the medicine line into Assiniboine, Gros Ventre, and Blackfeet territory. Then his family swung down along the Milk River, hunting buffalo. He had come back to the Turtle Mountains when there was no other choice. They were confined on the reservation and had to get permission from the farmer in charge to pass its boundaries. For a while, they were not allowed to go off to search for food, and one terrible winter, the old people starved themselves so that the young people could continue. Bebone had tried farming with the seed wheat, iron plow, and ox that the farmer in charge had issued to him in strict condition that the family not kill and eat the ox. The first year, nothing. They had to take turns sneaking past the boundaries, picking up buffalo bones to sell to the bone dealers. The next year, they did not plant the white man's grain, but corn, squash, and beans. The family dried the crops and cached the food. They didn't quite starve, but by spring they could barely walk. They were so skinny and weak. It took many years of finding what plants grew best in which soil, liked a wet or dry spot, sun in morning or afternoon. Thomas had learned from his father's experiments.
So Thomas does farm, just enough to kind of keep the family going. So I did want you to see what Louise Erdrich writes in her afterword about the termination bill. Erdrich writes, a total of 113 tribal nations suffered the disaster of termination. 1.4 million acres of tribal land was lost. Now that's just during the termination time, and that was 1953. Not one tribe in the whole country profited. In fact, the Turtle Mountain delegation was the first to mount a fierce defense and ultimately to prevail. Thomas helped to remake the earth for the Chippewa people after the flood of termination. Okay, so as you listen to James Welch's poem, The Man from Washington, read by Denise Juneau, I want you to think about the losses the Turtle Mountain people suffered. One of the last treaties, the Macomber Agreement, is called the 10-cent treaty. For the $1 million paid, and it wasn't cash in hand. Like I said, it was in trust, and the Indian people themselves had to ask for permission to use that money that was there. For 9 million acres ceded to the federal government in 1892. $1 million paid for 9 million acres. And the name of that treaty was the 10-cent treaty because that's what they paid. The federal government paid the Indian people 10 cents an acre. I can provide links for you to review regarding these treaties if you want. I think I did include that on that list. So here we're going to listen to Denise read this, and then we'll be able to look at it.
These women age slower than anyone else on Earth. Hidden in the hills of Asia, They're called the Hunza. Sources close to the tribe say that even at
I'm from Browning, Montana, on the Blackfeet Reservation, where James Welch is from as well, and so it's an honor to be able to read his poetry for this project. I really am a fan of James Welch. I was a teacher in Browning, and I taught Fool's Crow. That was one of my favorite novels, and so again, it's an honor to be able to do this. The Man from Washington by James Welch. The end came easy for most of us. Packed away in our crude beginnings in some corner of a flat world, we didn't expect much more than firewood and buffalo robes to keep us warm. The man came down, a slouching dwarf with rainwater eyes, and spoke to us. He promised that life would go on as usual, that treaties would be signed, and everyone, man, woman, and child, would be inoculated against a world in which we had no part, a world of money, promise, and disease.
I have to fix this right now because there is a mistake here. It is this word. Whoop. How come it isn't letting me do it?
Maybe because you're sharing the screen or something? What's the word that has to get fixed?
Anyway, it is he. It is not we. I don't know what's happening, but beside the point, I can at least tell you I got rid of the W. So so this is the poem. And I just want you to think about these questions over here. How promise, disillusionment, and betrayal are themes in Welch's poem. And so I want you to think about how these themes resonate with the novel and or treaty and termination policies. And where do you find irony? So if somebody wants to say something about the irony, that would be great. Or if there's something else you want to say, is there anything that's confusing about this? Anybody want to ask or say something?
I don't think the end was so easy.
No, but that was what they expected. And of course, but the end came easy. What do you think the poet means?
That they had no choice.
Maybe. I mean, it wasn't a war.
No.
They did not fight against the federal government here in these places.
Well, they had nothing to fight with.
Right. Yep. And what else?
And they'd probably learned every time they did fight, things became even less.
Yep. Is that Sonia that's talking?
Sonia.
Okay.
I grew up in Michigan and graduated from Ottawa Hills High School, home of the Ottawa Hills Indians.
Oh, okay. So the last line we will recall again, a world of money, a world of promise, and a world of disease. Because the smallpox had been introduced to these people. And so that was one of the reasons that the population was diminished, was starvation and then disease. I could tell you that.
Interesting though, even in the end, he puts it against a world in which we had no part.
Yes.
You know, no matter what happens and how they were changed, they're still not a part of it.
Right. And that's the part that the federal government refused to acknowledge. So there is a study guide that that Kelly sent out, and it has a list of the characters' names because this is a difficult novel to read without a list of the characters. So hopefully you'll open that study guide up with the names of these characters on it, because I'm certainly not going to talk about all of them. But when I was reading this aloud to my husband last summer, we had to write down these people because we'd be reading, and I'd say, now who is this and who is this one related to? It was difficult. So and I've read other people have said the same kind of things, but the study guide does kind of help that. So we're going to look first of all at the Washosh family. Who is Thomas? He's the tribal chairman and the night watchman at the Turtle Mountain Jewel Bearing Plant. Based on Erdrich's grandfather, Patrick Gourneau, he is named Washosh, or muskrat, the animal that helped remake the earth after the flood. Thomas helped for the Chippewa people after the flood of federal Indian policies. The nights when Thomas works at the plant, he reads newspapers, he writes letters to people who have business with the tribe, official correspondence. He brings midnight lunches with carrots he's raised himself, commodity cheese, venison sandwiches with Rose's Champion yeast bread. This is a salaried position, but he is not a rich man. On weekends, he uses the team and wagon to haul water for drinking. For bathing and cleaning, they have the rain barrels. In winter, they melt snow. Now, Erdrich found all of this out, not just because she knew what the 50s were like on the reservation, but because her grandfather kept extensive letters that she reviewed and studied. He first hears about the termination bill from his friend Moses Montrose, whose good friend in the Bureau of Indian Affairs has given Moses a copy of the bill. He tells Thomas, they mean to drop us. Thus begins the work of the tribal council and ultimately the entire tribe to fully deny the federal government's efforts. Thomas and possibly Erdrich's grandfather attended the Fort Totten boarding school in North Dakota. And if you click on this or go to the website that I have listed, you can read an article about this boarding school that is not active now. It's a historical site. So then there's the Pranto family. And I want you to think about Janet. It's like Janet, only Janet Pranto. She is Patrice's mother. She's the wife of an abusive alcoholic husband, a cousin to Thomas, and the mother of Patrice and Vera. As a child, her grandparents hid her. Now, this is Janet. They hid her from those who would force her to attend boarding school. Consequently, Janet was raised to speak Chippewa with all the tradition that language carried. She is the one who will pass that knowledge on. In the end of the novel, the Chippewa scholar Millie, raised apart from the reservation and tradition, returns to Turtle Mountain to study under Janet. The one piece of place of industry or employment is the jewel bearing plant, and that still exists. But it was called the Turtle Mountain jewel bearing plant. But I'm going to scroll down this article here. Where is this? Where am I? Will it scroll here? Nope, something's funny. Okay, here we go. And it was really good. It was good for the tribe. It was good for the young people. And it was possible for them to make their livings, but you don't see all of this kind of thing in the novel. You just hear the girls talking about the work that they do. And then he is the watchman that goes around to make sure everything is safe in the middle of the night. That's his job. But you can see when you look at these pictures, how close these girls have to get to what they're looking at, because they are putting jewels in bearings for watchmakers. So it's pretty complicated outfit. And some of them suffered some eye troubles. In fact, for sure, that was part of the problem that Patrice had, is that I think she developed glaucoma, and her eyes have to be treated. I'm not sure that was the result of the work, but you can look and see the strain. Who is Patrice, or let's go back to this. Who is Patrice or Pixie? Patrice is Janet's middle child, and she is the second person who is one of the main characters. She's 19 years old. She works at the Turtle Mountain Jewel Bearing Plant. She eats lard on bread or poor people food. Raised speaking Chippewa, she learned English, was class valedictorian, and became a Catholic, but she followed her mother's teachings and she knows her mother's song. Living between two worlds, Patrice is not blind to the differences between her world and the world of Doris Lauder, a white girl who also works at the plant. Doris's parents bought Chippewa land from the bank in 1910, a result of the allotment program when Indians were forced to sell their land for food and short-term survival. Who is Patrice? This is a quote from the novel. There were times when Patrice felt like she was stretched across a frame, like a skin tent. She tried to forget that she could easily blow away, or how easily her alcoholic, abusive father could wreck them all. This feeling of being the only barrier between her family and disaster wasn't new, but they had come so far since she started work. So there are two characters in the novel who take on responsibility, with the help of other people, of course, to save the people that are around them. Patrice is a female who, the more the novel goes on, the stronger she gets, and she's only 19 years old. So Kelly's going to read this novel by this poem by Joe McGeeshick. Joe was born and raised on the Fort Peck Reservation, and in some ways, Patrice's life resonates in McGeeshick's poem. It's called If I Lived in That House.
If I lived in that house, a father would read to his daughter. A man would throw a ball to a boy. A woman would softly kiss a child. A family would sit and eat a meal. A knock would go unanswered. A girl would cry in her small room. A boy would stand alone, staring down a hallway. A shiny faucet would drip into a white sink. A bare light would cast a yellow beam onto a porch. A dark silence would fill the black winter night. A rainstorm would blur an open field. And a man would not think too hard.
Okay, can somebody tell me where the focus of the poem shifts?
When it says a knock would go unanswered.
Yep. So what do you think is happening here?
Comparison of what you would like and what you have.
Okay, good. The poem deals with the theme of personal and cultural loss and survival, which is also true of this novel. As I communicated with each poet in preparation for the Birthright publication, I asked them if they would share what inspired them to write each poem. And this is what Joe wrote. I was in Bozeman walking along a street with these huge old opulent houses. And I was thinking about growing up in a tribal house on the Fort Peck Reservation. And this was Wilson. You guys know Wilson Street in Bozeman?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's where he was, and those are the houses that he was looking at. So we're still on the Pronto family. Patrice is the strong woman who fights off boys who would rape her, and she rejects the white teacher with haystack hair because he doesn't smell good. Doesn't smell like her mother's herbs. He smells probably like, I don't know, what do guys use? She isn't going to get married and be tied down. Despite a fear of riding the train and traveling away from the reservation, alone, Patrice follows an address scratched on a piece of paper to locate her sister Vera, who has taken off after the relocation program. Patrice knows who she is. She's Chippewa. Her home is Turtle Mountain. And in this strange place in the cities, and that's Minneapolis, St. Paul, she thinks, I am a stranger to myself. Another person, harder and bolder than the usual Patrice, had taken her over. I mean, it's really a fabulous novel about the strength of women and how important they are in all of the men's lives. Erdrich has created the storyline of Vera, Patrice's older sister, from the lives of many missing Indigenous women. It's no surprise that Erdrich's cities, or Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota setting, is actually one of the largest and most tribally diverse urban American Indian populations, numbering well over 35,000. So in Minneapolis, which has maybe a population of 400,000, 35,000 of those people are American Indians. And in Minnesota, our lieutenant governor is Ojibwe, the very first Native American ever to be elected as a governor or a lieutenant governor in the country. She's very, very bright. It's wonderful to hear her take the stance that she does. Across the country, roughly 7 out of 10 American Indians now live in cities, according to the January 2018 article in the Decolonial Atlas. But to the family at home on Turtle Mountain, Vera is lost, having left to follow the promise of the relocation program. So Patrice goes to the relocation office, and I have to say, I could not find a poster for Minneapolis. So I had to take one for Denver, but just look at what this thing says. Chance of a lifetime. Look what all the opportunities are. Come to this is what it said on the Minneapolis one. Come to Minneapolis, the chance of your lifetime. Good jobs in retail trade, manufacturing, happy homes, beautiful homes, many churches. She asked the clerk, don't you keep track of where people go? And the clerk answers, not after a while. So you see, the family has not heard from Vera. This is before the internet, before cell phones. Remember James Welch's The Man from Washington poem? We would be inoculated against a world in which we had no part, a world of money, promise, and disease. So a large number of homeless in Minneapolis, downtown Minneapolis, live, are Ojibwe, mostly Ojibwe, because the Dakota people were pretty much wiped out. And so south of the Minnesota River is where the Dakota people were. Ojibwe were north, and there were centuries of conflict between the Ojibwe and the Dakota people. So then I'm not going to clue into this because this is the article, part of which this came from. Is there somebody who would like to read this page from the screen here? Enid?
Well, I could, but I can't see the whole thing. Well, I'll start. Minneapolis, Minnesota. Native American poverty doesn't fit the images. Many may have a life on secluded, depleted reservations. Most Native Americans now live in cities, where many are still trying to adjust to urban life as I can't see part of that. Native Americans group of Native Americans face a 27% poverty rate and are still trying to reverse some of the lasting effects of federal policies that have put them at a disadvantage for hundreds of years. The Indian Relocation Act of 1956 was the impetus for the relocation of a large number of Native Americans now living in urban areas. Though is this blocking you, this thing that anyway,
I can see it.
Oh, I can't. Yeah, didn't force people to leave their reservations. It made it hard for families to stay by dissolving federal recognition of most tribes and ending federal funding for reservation schools, hospitals, and basic services, along with the jobs they created. Though the federal government paid a relocation expense to the cities and provided some vocational training, urban Native Americans faced high levels of job discrimination and few opportunities for job advancement.
I apologize for that. I don't thank you very much. I just want you to remember that this is historical fiction, and Erdrich chose to incorporate the events from relocation in 56 to 1953. So the Relocation Act actually started in 1956, but her story is in 1953 because that's when the termination bill was happening. So she wanted to include the story of relocation with this novel, and so she changed the date. That's what happened. If Patrice is going to find Vera, Wood Mountain, who is handsome young man who actually is in love with her, tells her this: if you're going to go to the cities, go to the scum, and definitely the not police. Once she finds the address she's looking for, Jack, her driver, tells her this: so what can happen to a girl in your situation or your sister's situation is this: with the unpaid bills and all, she runs out on the landlord, makes it hard to get a new place. So maybe she changes her name, or maybe she moves in with somebody else, a friend, let's say. She pays the friend in money or in services. So basically, Patrice is finding out this is possibly what happened to her sister. It's important to consider why Vera is not a fully developed character in the novel. And one of my friends that read it said, I wanted to know more about Vera. Well, representing one of the thousands of missing girls and women, her vague representation and story is more honest and definitely more tragic when told more through the eyes of those who miss her. So Patrice fulfills what Erdrich no doubt wishes could happen for every lost girl or woman. At great risk, Patrice searches for her. For certain, the Night Watchman and the Roundhouse have definitely raised awareness and hope. So Hyde Erdrich also is, and I will read this poem, I think. She showed you that National Monuments collection, And this poem speaks to themes of personal loss and survival and the strength of women. And it's called She Was the Kind. So when I was looking through, because I have that collection of poetry, I found this poem and I thought, oh my gosh, this sounds like Patrice. So I'm going to read this to you. She was the kind to tell it like it is, to kiss and tell, to kiss and kill, to kill with kindness. She was the kind to get things through her thick skull, to work her fingers to the bone, to work her on her back, to never take it lying down. She was the kind to lay down the law, to get down on her knees, to get up on her feet, to give an inch and take a mile. She was the kind to stand up for herself, to sit down, strike, to go to the wall, to take it to the limit. She was the kind to take it too far, to drop off the face of the earth, to face the music, to hit rock bottom. She was the kind to get back on that horse and ride it, to get up on her high horse, to get down to business, to turn the world upside down. And the truth is that I think that the second to the last stanza, she was the kind to take it too far, is Vera's story. Janet is strong as well, the mother, and Rose, Thomas's wife, you'll love her. So anyway, I love this poem for what it does to help us understand. So you probably have heard of Paul Bunyan. And this Paul Bunyan guy plays a role here. And so I'm just going to open up a map that shows you. So this is Bemidji, Minnesota. This is lower. This is where the Ojibwe people in Minnesota live, right up here. On Highway 2 is the Paul Bunyan and Babe Blue Ox statues. Near Bemidji. And this is kind of, well, actually Duluth is over here because this is Lake Superior. And so Vera ends up in Duluth, which is north. And but this Babe the Blue Ox story becomes kind of important in what Patrice finds in Minneapolis. Paul Bunyan is the mythical hero of the lumber camps in the United States. And what happened with the Ojibwe people in the northern half of Minnesota is that they treated their land because they thought that they were going to be able to live the same way they used to. But what they didn't know when they treated the land was that the trees would be all logged. So the logging that occurred in northern Minnesota came from Ojibwe land, and that is what built Chicago. So the people were devastated by the logging. So it's very ironic that this is the figure that people, idolize kind of for how strong he was in the Blue Ox. But a lot of it is related to the way this story is told. So Patrice ends up in the cities and she goes to the scum. And this this is the picture that Louise Erdrich, of the place that Louise Erdrich imagined for a place that she would end up. And in that Palms place was a stripper. Now, this is not what Patrice looked like, but Patrice gets a job working there and she's going to make $50 a night, more money than she's ever had, but she has to dress up in this Blue Ox outfit and dance in a water tank. And that really did happen. So this is a picture of the Palms just before it was demolished. So I'm going to open up the map of Bloomington Avenue where that happened. And And of course, the whole area was demolished, and this is what it looks like now. But look at what else you can see in the area. This 2214 Bloomington Avenue is where that Palms was. But this is Native American country in Minneapolis. The All Nations Indian Church, the Minnesota Indian Women's Organization, Mashkiki, Gittigan, Hiawatha Towers. Anyway, this is Indian country, which isn't too far from the Birch Bark books. Okay, so the Iron Bear family, Juggy Blue represents a link between the white and Chippewa community. She serves on the Tribal Advisory Council with Thomas, and she's caretaker and cook for the bachelor's quarters. So the men who are teaching at the school are staying in that place, and she is the cook. She is the mother of Wood Mountain, who follows Patrice to the cities. So who is the Pipestone family? Louis Pipestone represents the tribal leader who persists in seeking the signatures from each and every tribal member on the petition. His daughter, Millie, raised in Minnesota, is a Chippewa scholar who represents a composite of several who actually helped the tribal council construct the defense. So they had to build the defense that they would take to Washington, D.C. And so these are names of people that are in the novel, but they do represent real people that did this work to make this happen. So what we are going to look at next on April 20th is the termination bill in itself, and the documents, a couple of other documents. One is an excerpt. We're going to look at an excerpt from Lincoln's inaugural address in 1963, and what he says about Indian people might shock you a little bit. But we're going to talk about the duplicitous nature of the language that they used. And so I'm going to give you a little heads up about how to think about the words in the language. And I'm going to just give you a little activity here. We're going to ask 3 questions of whatever you might read. And I want you to think about it with what you hear and see on the news now. What does a word or phrase say? That means, what's the dictionary definition? What does that word or phrase mean to various audiences? And then why does the meaning, not the dictionary definition, but why does the meaning matter? So for example, he was having a bad day. Why did I put that in this slideshow, folks? Where did you hear that? Do you know? What happened in Atlanta a week or 2 weeks ago?
I know that. I just didn't know the source.
The Asian, yeah.
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 Okay. And the police chief says that the killer was having a bad day. So what does a bad day mean? Oh, maybe you didn't get to watch your favorite TV show. Or maybe your hair didn't turn out right. For a lot of us, that's what that word means to us. That's one of the connotations. So here you have a man standing talking about a killer. And he says he was having a bad day. So what I want you to do is think about, what do the words that we hear or say mean to different audiences? And then I want you to look at this list. What do these names all have in common?
A lot of times when you define things and you connect a culture or a people with an incident of war or death.
Yeah, and these are all from American perspective. So Korean War, Vietnam War, World War II, that's pretty general. Gulf War, Vietnam War, they are the names of the enemies to the Americans who fought in this war. Indian Wars. Now, those of you who are librarians, and I've talked to Kelly about this, you probably have several books. Indian Wars, that's the title of them. Well, do you think the Native people themselves called them Indian Wars? Do the Koreans talk about the war being the Korean War? They probably talk about it being the war with the Americans. So it all has to do with the perspective. So we name things as enemies. The Chinese virus, that's become pretty controversial too, of course.
But they're also the location.
Yes, they are the location, but
I mean, from this point of view, what else would you call it? What else would you have called the war in Vietnam?
Well,
because you also hear those you also will hear the war in Vietnam. So you will also hear it the other way. Right. Indian Wars, though, that's such a interesting historical perspective on how people who were writing at the time and even now perceive things.
That's right. Yeah. Yep. And then there was, oh no, this is, so I'm going too far now. So what I want to do is go back to these questions that I want you to think about now as you read the novel and get ready, because I'm not going to go any farther. So I'm going to go back to my, where is my screen with you guys?
I have a question though. If we think about something as we're reading, can we email our questions?
Oh, please do. Oh, please do. Yeah, that would be awesome.
Okay.
I don't know how to see where you guys are. Here, maybe this is it. Where am I? How can I find where you are, you guys?
I believe you shut us off.
I did, huh? Open Zoom meetings? No, here it is. Nope, it's down here someplace. Chat. People have chatted and I haven't seen that.
At the bottom, there should be a thing for share screen, and you hit that arrow and say you want to stop sharing your screen if you want to do that.
Where's that? Okay.
Right at the bottom in the center.
Sharing. Okay, there we go. Oh, now I can see you. Okay.
So Dottie, do I have permission to share your email?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to put that in this chat box.
Okay.
For everyone, and I will also send these links out just quickly before you wrap things up to make sure I get these in. This is a program that is brought to everyone because of a grant from Humanities Montana, and we're very grateful for that grant. So I have included 3 links. There is a link if someone wants to donate to Humanities Montana. There is another link to sign up for the Humanities Montana newsletter. And there's a third link, very important evaluation link. We'd love to hear your evaluation of tonight's program. You can save the chat if you like by clicking on the 3 little ellipses by file and click save chat if you want to save those. And then I'll also be emailing all of the links as well as her PowerPoint slide, the Word document that she visited about, and the link for her email. So you'll receive all of that in a follow-up. So you'll get all of that. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dottie.
Okay. So does anybody have anything, some kind of feedback, or do you want to talk at all now about anything?
I just have a quick question. The Little Turtle Reservation that was now designated, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were they related at all to this tribe or not?
The Turtle Mountain, oh yes. And the setting for the novel is the Turtle Mountain Reservation, where her grandfather lived. Is that the question?
No, I mean, no, the one in Montana, that was finally.
Oh, you're talking about the Little Shell?
The Little Shell, yeah.
Or the Rocky Boys. Actually, one of the men who was signing or involved in one of the treaties, and I can tell you for sure he wasn't happy, his name was Chief Rocky Boy.
Ah, okay.
The experience of the Rocky Boy people and the Little Shell people being landless was similar to the Ojibwe people living on the Turtle Mountain Reservation. Because
and growing up in Michigan, for us, when we learned Indian history, it was so much coming actually from Maine and the coast, and then being shoved inward and up into Canada, and then eventually into, the Montana area, that I always find it fascinating to see how the cultures ended up squished because of the way Europeans moved all the way around them.
Oh yeah, right. And I think that the language of the Ojibwe is related to the Iroquois language.
Which would make sense. They were right by each other.
Right. And there is, and I don't have access to that little book right now, because I gave away about 800 of my books to each of the reservation libraries before I left Montana. But this is
how come you left Montana? What were you thinking?
Oh, I know it. I don't want to have left Montana. That's the truth. But I'm very happy in Minnesota. We love it here, but our daughter lives here and she has 2 children. We wanted to watch them grow up, and living 10 miles from Fairfield out in the country. My husband is disabled. It just was driveway was a half a mile long, and he needed health help at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, which is only 80 miles.
Yeah, so you're in the right place.
We are in the right place. But
have you ever gone to Mackinac Island?
No.
That's my stomping ground.
North.
You can really get your native culture going that way.
Yes. Well, we're going to spend 3 nights north of Duluth.
No, you got to say it right. Duluth. If you're good Norwegian, you say Duluth.
Duluth.
Oh,
Duluth. Oh.
My grandfather was from Norway, and he got his Norwegian paper from Duluth.
Oh, okay.
We used to crack up laughing.
Well, that's
it's like only
funny.
grandpa's going to Duluth. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of Norwegians around us. I have a really strong Norwegian who lives right across the street from me. We live in a cul-de-sac of people. It's a new development. All of us moved in within the first year or so. And she's very Norwegian, but in downtown Minneapolis now, we have a huge population of Somalis, people from Senegal. My grandson plays basketball with an immigrant son from Senegal. And
my niece is a pharmacist there.
In where?
In Minneapolis, just outside of it.
Oh, is she?
So,
where?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember what little town she's by. I went there for her wedding. It was great. But big culture shock when you go there when you're from a little teeny town of Rosebud, Montana.
Oh, sure. Well, that's how Patrice felt when she gets on the train by herself. She had never, she was 19 years old. She'd never left the reservation.
Yeah. Well, it'll be an interesting read. So thank you very much.
Well, I hope you guys get to read it and anymore. Why, I think it'll be okay to pop in with people. If we have some discussion at the head of at the very beginning, kind of catch people up if there's more people that come. But anyway.
Yeah.
So I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and thank you for coming, folks.
You bet. It looks like it ought to be good.
I hope so. Hope you. I think it's pretty hard to not love this novel, I think. But it was a doozy to read without any kind of help ahead of time. There are a few.
So did you go to the Birch Park bookstore yet or not yet? Have you been?
I have been there many times.
I'll check that out.
I
sometime.
said, and maybe you weren't here, it is the place I would go to buy original publications of Native authored books, mostly picture books and young adult literature, because they are the source. So
isn't it interesting? Montana, we don't
my
have
daughter
that.
lives here, see, in Minneapolis. Well, she lives in Roseville. And we would come back at least once a year and maybe twice a year. And one of the places I would always go. And then I would take my granddaughter to breakfast in a little cafe that was right next door to it. In fact,
fun.
I came back one time and rescued my brother from alcoholism and was in the Birch Bark books visiting with one of the clerks. And she said, there is a great rehab center, and we contacted them, and that's where my brother recovered. And it was because that connection happened at the Birch Bark books. But I did meet Louise there one day.
So now you're gonna have to go to Inga Bretson's and get your Norwegian on.
Oh yeah, well I was to
store.
Inga Bretson's last well, I think I probably didn't go there. I went there before COVID.
That's where I do my terrible Christmas shopping every year.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Thank God for online shopping.
Sonia?
Yes, can't you tell? Norwegian.
Yes, I guess.
Norwegian and Scottish. What a great mix.
Oh, okay. Okie doke.
Okay, guess we got to get going, but it's been nice meeting you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for hanging around, folks.
It was fun.
Yeah, good. And is Debbie from Miles City? Where is Debbie from?
Sonia's from Miles City.
Oh, Sonia's from Miles City. I wonder if I've met her before.
I think Enid is, oh, no, I spoke too soon. I was thinking Enid wanted to say something. Okay, never mind.
Okay, she's the only one whose picture I can see. So I have done some teaching in Miles City.
Where at?
Well, I went to the high school and taught in service with all the teachers. And
with whose class? Which class did you do?
I didn't go into a classroom. I went to the teachers.
Yeah.
Did an in-service with them. Well, that's not true.
When was that?
I think it was 10 or 11 years ago, maybe 12 years ago.
Okay. Because one time I did a humanities deal and I brought the kids that go to St. Library, and we did a St. Library mixing with the kids, and it was great with them talking about school.
Great idea.
It was wonderful. Yeah.
The music teacher, the large man that's a music teacher, was the music teacher.
Mr. Anna Laura. He's wonderful.
That's right. And his wife, who was the librarian. Those are the two people I worked with.
They have both retired.
Oh,
just this past year, they're done. Yeah.
Yeah.
My children had both of them and loved them.
Yeah. And then when they had gatherings, so I that was a long time ago. I guess I probably did some classes. So I'm pretty sure that was 2007.
Okay.
2008, maybe.
Yeah.
That I went into some classrooms, but they were larger groups of people. I taught about boarding school to a group of government kids.
Yeah.
And then when
you're probably in Tracy Duffin's class.
I don't know about
for government.
I don't know. That's a long time.
Yeah, that's my guess though. Yeah.
It could have been. And then your association, like we had in our area, the Golden Triangle, and then what's it called there in your area, where it was